Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Galatea and this is my silent co-host, Asis. And today I'm going to be explaining why I think the television show His Dark Materials is a pile of shit. A couple of years ago, a few years ago, when I first heard that they were making this, a BBC adaptation of His Dark Materials, one of my favourite book series of all time, I was so excited. And the fact that the BBC were doing it, I was really optimistic about. I was actually like, oh, I don't know if you guys saw it, but the BBC did an adaptation of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I thought that adaptation was fantastic. I was like, okay, a British fantasy book that the BBC is going to adapt, they're going to do it well. They're going to do it really, really well. They did it with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's going to be fabulous. It wasn't. I'm not today going to set my timer for half an hour because everything I have to say is going to take a lot longer than that. I don't know how long the final video is going to be. Hopefully not too long, but I've got a lot to say. I've got a lot to say on this subject. I mentioned before in previous videos that I did not like the recent adaptation of His Dark Materials that I think the BBC and HBO did. I hate it, in fact. And some of you wanted to know why. I wasn't going to talk about why on my channel. I wasn't going to do a review of it. But here we are. So I haven't seen series 2 of His Dark Materials, and I haven't seen the whole of series 1. When I mentioned in a video that I really didn't like it, I'd only seen the first 2 episodes. That was all it took. And then near the end of the video, I'll get to the point what happened. There's something that happened in episode 2 to do with a story that caused me to decide that I was not going to watch any more of the show because it annoyed me so much. I wasn't going to rewatch it, I was just going to go off what I remembered and just sort of rant to the camera, very unscripted. But then I was like, ugh, no, if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it properly, or at least semi-properly. I'll rewatch just the first 2 episodes, what I watched before, and then so I refresh my memory and remember. And then it ended up actually being a semi-scripted video. I have 3,300 words here on my laptop. So thank you for making me rewatch it. Some disclaimers before we begin. Okay, first of all, this isn't going to be the most serious of analysis. You want my opinion, so this is my opinion. Most of this is very, yes, and I understand that, personal opinion, how I feel how I feel about the show, rather than me being analytical about it. Having said that, however, when I went back and rewatched it, I actually did start to get more analytical and work out really why I didn't like it. So it'll be a bit of both. That was the first disclaimer. Second disclaimer, my little sister has my copy of the book. Last week when I was like, oh, next week I'll talk about His Dark Materials, I didn't realise I'd lent my copy of the book to my little sister, and she is halfway across the country right now at school. Normally I would go back to the book and check my facts, make sure, skim read the novel again, make sure I was remembering things correctly so I could refer to it in terms of, analysing that against the adaptation, but I just had to call her yesterday, so we're relying on a 15-year-old's memory of the book she's currently halfway through, and also some photographs she sent me of key chapters. So all I can say is, if I get some facts wrong about the original novel, I'm sorry, okay? I've done my best. I don't have my copy with me. That was the second disclaimer, and blame it on my sister if I get it wrong. Also, third disclaimer, my point of reference for this discussion is only the first 2 episodes of His Dark Materials. This isn't a review of the whole series because I couldn't get through the whole series. I didn't want to get through the whole series. I felt like I'd been disappointed enough and I didn't want to have to go further with it. Maybe it got better, but I don't care to find out because the first 2 episodes are frankly so disappointing that I've lost all interest in it, and I'd rather just have the books in my mind as they are. I also do want to say that I'm not really going to be using much footage from His Dark Materials TV show because the BBC have screwed me over several times when I use under fair use footage from their television shows. Remember my video of noughts and crosses? Yeah. First of all, they copyright struck it and I didn't make any, well, I don't really make any money from my videos anyway, but they were making all the ad revenue from that video, which is fine. That annoyed me, but it's fine. What they've done now, I just realised that video disappeared. They've blocked it in all countries now and it's fair use footage. So I'm just going the process of trying to blur out all the footage I've used, which will make my video not really make sense anymore, to re-release it because the BBC honestly do one. I'm really sick of them. Well, you made a shit show, mate, so you know what? Who's laughing now? So firstly, some positives. Let's get them out the way first of the TV show. Firstly, the opening titles. Yeah, this is how low it's gone. This is what I can compliment. Now, the opening titles genuinely were beautiful. I really liked them. I thought they were really magical and also clever. I thought it was really clever, the opening titles, in terms of encapsulating the whole series. Opening titles were very nice, so well done. Round of applause. Also the Magisterium. The first time around I watched it, I didn't like the Magisterium. I think because it was so different from how I'd imagined it and how it was in the movie. But rewatching it in the TV show, I did actually like it, and I appreciate what they've done. You know, they've changed it up aesthetically, changed the aesthetic. But I thought that was really cool. I actually really liked it. Basically, watching it back, I liked the aesthetic of the Magisterium, and I thought the acting in the Magisterium and the dialogue between the baddies and the Magisterium was good. I thought that was good, and that's probably the only positive I'm going to say about the acting and the dialogue for the rest of this video, because all the rest of it wasn't good. People are like, why do you hate this show? It is actually quite hard for me to work it out. Normally I'm quite good at knowing why I don't like something. I could just see watching it and going, this is horrendous, I hate it. But for some reason I found this kind of harder to separate in my mind and work out what exactly I hated. The first thing I can say that I know why, definitely I didn't like it, is that it was so boring. It's harder for me to sort of pick apart exactly what about it was boring, but I just know that it was really boring, which is not, it kind of, right off the bat, it's kind of a damning review for a show, really. I was so bored watching it. I was so bored. So, as I was watching it again to prepare for this video, and I kept getting distracted, I kept checking my phone, I kept pausing it, turning it off, and going off and doing something. My attention span's normally quite good in terms of stuff like that. It wasn't. And then actually, as you'll see later in the video, I'm going to bring up a point from Game of Thrones, but basically I had to watch the opening scene of Game of Thrones, and I only meant to watch the first 5 minutes of the episode, and I ended up watching half the episode. And that was yesterday, the same day when I watched this, and I was like, that just says it all in terms of TV show quality. One show I only mean to watch for 5 minutes and I'm hooked because it's so good, and the other show I'm so bored, even trying really hard, I'm not interested. Right, so the story. Let's start off with explaining why I thought the story failed. So firstly, it starts with one of the worst kind of beginnings in stories ever, really, in a TV show. So it comes up, the first thing that happens in the show is just text comes up on the screen. So, and I'm paraphrasing here and cutting out some parts, but basically I'm going to read to you roughly what appears on the screen before anything happens. Season 1, episode 1 of His Dark Materials, the first things you see before anything else. This story starts in another world where a human soul takes the physical form of an animal, blah 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 blah. And it basically explains that a human soul is called a demon. The relationship between human and demon is sacred. The world has been controlled for centuries by the all-powerful Magisterium, except in the wilderness of the north, where witches whisper of a prophecy of a child with a great destiny. During the Great Flood, this child was brought to Oxford. So I hate this. I hate this a lot, that they have just started with a massive info dump. It doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't show me this, don't tell me this. It's so lazy when you just go, here's the world and this is what's happening and this child is magical and she came to Oxford during the Great Flood. No, don't do that. You know what annoys me so much about that beginning is that the book, in my opinion, is one of the best book openings ever. For the first line, it's so good I'm planning on doing a video of it at some point, how good the opening is. But basically the first sentence is, in the book, the opening line is, Lyra and her demon ran through the darkening hall, taking care to keep to one side, out of sight of the kitchen. Starts off right in the action. You have to figure out as it goes along, what's a demon? It's her demon. What does that mean? So it's not a bad demon, clearly. What is a demon? You're not just told it's a human soul, like straight out right at the beginning, and you're not told who Lyra is. You're going, who is this? Who is this? Who is she? Why is she here? What's her story? So I'm going to contrast the opening of His Dark Materials with another fantasy TV show. Game of Thrones, okay? And I know it got terrible in later seasons, but the first few seasons were fantastic, especially the first season and the first episode. So here's how Game of Thrones began. Bearing in mind the Game of Thrones world is as complicated, if not more so, than His Dark Materials world. More so in terms of characters and things you've got to remember and histories. It's really, really complex. There's way more there. So this is how Game of Thrones began. So it starts off with 3 men on horses waiting as a gate is lifted. They then travel beyond the gate through a long tunnel into a wasteland of ice and snow. Who are they? Where are they? What are they doing? We don't know any of this, but we're interested. something ominous is happening. They're venturing into unknown territory, that's clear. Apart from 2 words said to his horse, it's 3 minutes before any words, spoken or written, appear in the Game of Thrones episode 1. Three whole minutes of just stuff happening, rather than contrast that with the beginning of His Dark Materials, words immediately right at the beginning, so when we don't get lost like silly little children that we apparently are and forget everything and not know what's going on. No, 3 minutes before anything is spoken, any words of any kind. And then the 3 men split up, and one of the men comes across bodies, torn up and placed on the ground in a pattern. What's going on? We don't know, but we're interested. The man goes back with his companions, finds his companions, goes back to the bodies just a few minutes later, and the bodies are all gone without a trace. We're on the edge of our fucking seat. I don't want to make this into a Game of Thrones analysis, so I will condense the rest of this and won't go on. But basically the men are then, high tension scene, the men are then killed in the woods by what seem to be dead men. Then it cuts instantly from that to a cheerful scene of the Stark children practicing archery. The tone is light and happy, but we know it won't be for long. We still don't really know anything. What's going on? Who are these people? How are they important to the story? We don't yet know that they're the Starks. What will happen to them? We don't know any of this, but we bloody well want to know. And it's not a confusing sort of, I don't know what's going on, but it's an interesting sort of, oh my, something's happening here. It keeps us interested and curious. And again, Game of Thrones world is so complex, but it doesn't feel the need to explain it all at the beginning. Like seriously, go and watch the opening scene of Game of Thrones on YouTube. Season 1, episode 1, and see what I mean, in how good of an opening to a television show it is. And I know it's a very different show to His Dark Materials, but my point I think still stands, that even though you do it in a different way, but you can still create interest and start off a really complicated fantasy show without having to info dump loads of information right at the beginning. You can start off sort of somewhere interesting. Because here's the thing. The key to storytelling is curiosity. Honestly, no matter the quality of your story, if you can keep a reader or a viewer curious, you've got them. I want, all of you, think about a really bad show that you've watched, that's just, it's terrible, or a really bad book that you've read. But think about something you've seen or read that was terrible, and you knew it was terrible as you were reading it, but you wanted to know what happened next. You were still curious about it, so you didn't put the book down, or you didn't turn the show off because you were like, I know this is really bad, but I just want to know what happens. That's why I read the Shadowhunters books for so long, even though they suck. Because credit where credit's due, Cassandra Clare's actually not half bad at making you wonder what's going to happen next. I just feel like Game of Thrones managed to do that and create curiosity, and like I said, I was bored at the beginning of His Dark Materials. It didn't do that because it just sort of spewed out all the key information lazily at the beginning, and then you kind of knew what was going on, and it was like the TV show was playing catch up really, rather than starting and you having to work out who are these people, what's going on, what's this world, what are those demons, what am I making sense? So, okay, I want you now to imagine, and this is going to be a long video, I know, I'm sorry, I want to explain myself properly though. You asked for it, that's all I'm saying, you guys asked for this. So imagine now, I want you to imagine if Game of Thrones started like His Dark Materials did. Season 1, episode 1 opens, and up on the screen, we get an info dump of something like, years ago, the land was torn apart by war, and everyone's fighting over a crown, blah, blah, blah. And in the far north, there is an ice wall to guard against the feared White Walkers, believed to have been extinct for thousands of years, but are they really? Oh, and they're dead men made of ice, sort of. And the north, the wall in the north, it's manned by the Night's Watch, men sworn to protect the land of the living with their very lives. And also there's a guy called Jon Snow who's going to become a member of the Night's Watch, and also he has a great destiny. Imagine if they did that like they did with His Dark Materials, where they're like, oh, there's a child, there's a prophecy about her, and this is the world, by the way. I know His Dark Materials, in the book, it's revealed very early on that there is a prophecy about Lyra. I know that, but it's still revealed in an interesting way within the story, and you've already experienced something of the story and you're still interested, what's this prophecy, what's going on. It just felt lazy to me. Imagine how bad that would be as a beginning to Game of Thrones, okay? We have all this information that I just said in that info dump at the beginning of Game of Thrones. It would be terrible. No, we have to find all this information out gradually because the show doesn't treat us like we're stupid, and that creates the interest of what's this world, what's going on, what were those things in the woods? Who is this? How are these Stark children connected to it? What's, you're taken along in its curiosity. You're taken along on the journey with the story. The show doesn't treat us like we're stupid. I felt like His Dark Materials kind of does. And basically the whole show in general, it just feels very childish to me. So there's a moment in the TV show where the Master tries to poison Lord Asriel, and as it's happening in this show, Lyra's sort of whispering, "He's poisoning my uncle," as we see it happening, which is obvious because we can see it happening. And it's not just that, it's like everything. Everything in this show just felt really spelt out to me. Like they, they had to hold our hand through it. His Dark Materials messed with the tension. That's only one of the ways they messed with the tension, info dumping everything at the beginning rather than allowing us to figure out what's happening and go along with the story for ourselves. What I didn't like, and I know a lot of this is my personal opinion, how I personally feel, other people will probably disagree, but what I disliked was I thought they really messed with the tension by bringing in our world too soon. So in the show, for those of you who don't know and for some reason watching this video, obviously you've got, in the books there are parallel worlds. Lyra's story takes place in a parallel world to ours, in a parallel Oxford. And in the second book is when our world actually comes into the story and it becomes part of it. In the show, they did from the second episode, they brought our world into the story. So rather than leaving that until really, in terms of how they've structured it, that should have been brought in season 2, the revelation that our world exists in this sort of story world. I understand why they did that, why they brought our world in episode 2. I guess they're trying to add depth to the story and bring in multiple plot lines, kind of Game of Thrones style, to deepen it, to make the story more intricate and complex right from the beginning, to give these other storylines more space. I understand that. I just don't think they did it well and it worked in any way, shape or form, to be honest. I really liked the fact in the book that the other worlds are hinted at in book 1, but we're solely in Lyra's world. And I remember the joy for the first time of reading the second book, The Subtle Knife. I remember reading that for the first time when I was a kid and just realizing in wonder that it began in our world, that it was happening in our world. And my brain just exploded and I'm thinking, how does this relate to Lyra? When does she come in? And it just expanded the whole story, but also it successfully kept the tension and our curiosity throughout the whole first book, because throughout the whole first book we don't know if other worlds are real. We get a sense that there's a wider picture going on, that there's more to this. Lyra's just discovering it and we grow and discover with her about other things. And then as she discovers other worlds, we discover, and our world comes into it and it's like, oh my goodness, it feels more bigger and the story's suddenly gotten so much bigger. But it kept the tension so well, I thought, anyway, throughout the whole first book, because it teases you, are there other worlds? We don't know. And then the second book is the thrill of it's our world and it's in with Lyra's world, and is she going to see our world? This is so cool. So basically, my very long way of saying that is I think this show was just very bad in general at building the tension and keeping your curiosity, at providing a good payoff, really, to anything. Because the books got you interested in one girl, one story, in Lyra. And guided you through into something bigger at the point where you care enough about her and the world not to lose interest and to understand. I think the show did too much too soon and I found it boring. The compelling mystery of the books, of the show really, from at the beginning is, what are they doing with the children? There are children going missing. Why are they going missing? What's happening? And what are they doing to them? That in the book was the compelling plotline, the mystery of it. And I feel like that was lost in the show. That core the interest that really felt was a really strong interest, the core of it. I felt like they lost the centre. They lost that. It just became a bit confused and a bit dull, and there wasn't I feel like it tried to make it too complex too soon. Too clever. I think the show tried to be too clever. And again, one of the reasons I mentioned Game of Thrones is because I sort of feel like this show was kind of trying too hard to be Game of Thrones, with multiple plot lines. But I just don't think it works with the story. There are some stories that multiple plot lines are fantastic, multiple character point of view. Game of Thrones was made for that, obviously, because it's such a because it's such a complex world. It was written like that. You have many main characters, and obviously Game of Thrones has been so influential on television since it came out. It's had such a huge impact on TV, and I feel like obviously a lot of shows coming along now and trying to emulate the success of Game of Thrones, that, having another big budget fantasy show, and they're like, oh, really complex world, loads of stories, loads of stuff going on, plot lines. I don't think it worked with this story, at least in the way that they did it, maybe it could have worked if they'd done it differently, but one of the joys, as I said, of the books is that it's from Lyra's point of view. It's her story. You grow really attached to this one girl. She guides you through the story and the mystery, and there's really one protagonist. The point of, because these books were written with one protagonist. And it's not that I wouldn't have minded if they'd had other scenes without her. Obviously, you kind of have to do that for the TV show, but it was just the way they did it. It felt too confused. With the Egyptians, again, so the multiple perspective thing, they were focusing more on the Egyptians in the show than they did really in the book. They got a lot of airtime. But the problem was, because it was a different perspective, what you lost with this was Lyra's relationship with them. So even though the Egyptians were in the show, because they sort of, I guess, wanted to expand the world and have more of it, you then didn't have... I loved seeing the Egyptians through Lyra's eyes, through her, because it said more about her character. She's really the most important element of the book. You see them through her eyes, and you see her relationship with them. When they did that and separated the stories, you lose a lot of Lyra's character, and you lose a lot of the Egyptians as well, because they seem a bit disjointed and separate, and you just lose that lovely dynamic. I know that'll probably come in later in the show, I didn't get to that point, but still, I just liked at the beginning when she's a kid running around Oxford with Egyptian children, and you didn't see that. So she just says, it's just mentioned, when Billy Costa goes missing. In the TV show, she just mentions, oh, Billy Costa, I remember him. When Billy goes missing, it's like, okay, well, I don't know, this is me getting annoyed about change the books, but in the books, again, it's like, brilliant, Lyra. Well, because in the books, you've known the Costa family your whole life. As we know in the book, you've known the Costa family all your life, so thank you for, I remember Billy when he's gone missing. It kind of loses a bit of the impact of it when it's not a family that's established. She knows them, and she's played with their kids, and she's fought with them before, and she's fought with Billy Costa, and all of that. It's just... oh, Billy, if this kid called Billy's gone missing. Oh, that's a shame. Okay, and I also, this is kind of what annoyed me, I also felt that our world, when we saw it, looked way too similar to Lyra's, because obviously our world was brought in at a very early point. I didn't feel there was enough difference between Lyra's world and our world in the show. And I understand that they probably wanted to differentiate it, how Lyra's world looked in the show from the movie. I thought the movie aesthetically, I loved that. I thought it did really, really well, and it just seemed rich and really came to life, and would have really been different from our world had they gone on to make more movies. Because it felt more old. Obviously it does look like our world, but like a more older, slightly more magical version of our world. I guess they wanted to differentiate it aesthetically from the movie, which I can appreciate, but they had this kind of whole modern look going on, which I thought worked fabulously for the Magisterium, very sinister, kind of Nazi vibes, but for the rest of the world, it just felt very ordinary. For the Magisterium it worked, it was clinical, cold, creepy, but grand. It worked, the whole kind of slightly modern vibe, but for the rest of the world, it just made it not different enough from our world, because it just looked quite modern. Lyra's bedroom, for example, at Mrs. Coulter's house, I was looking at it going, it really annoyed me. It annoyed me irrationally, actually, how much the scene of her bedroom in Mrs. Coulter's house looked. It just looked so modern, and just so, not even just modern, but just ordinary. Really, you have this other world, this TV show taking place in another world, and it just looks like kind of a hotel bedroom or something? Like a boring hotel bedroom? Yeah, kind of fancy, but just dull and everything. It just felt ordinary. That's the thing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the movie, because I rewatched the movie, and the movie also begins with an info dump, but the whole thing just feels really magical in a way that the show didn't. And I think that's one of my core problems with it. And I said this will be a lot opinion based and not so analytical. The show just didn't feel magical. It didn't feel magic. It didn't feel like reading the book felt. It didn't feel, even I know that there's a lot of problems with the movie, but it didn't even feel like watching the movie felt. I wanted to feel transported to this alive, rich, wondrous other world in the same way that I did when I read the book, but I just wasn't. The other thing with the story as well, I'm pretty sure the first we hear of the Gobblers in the TV show is after Billy goes missing. But I liked it in the book and also in the movie. It's mentioned, it's seeded beforehand. We know about the Gobblers. We hear, and it's a game. I love that they made it this innocent children's game. Lyra and the other kids are playing kids and Gobblers. So, and it's all rumours and it's all sort of a bit exciting until it becomes real. And I love that it was foreshadowing, obviously, but it's bringing it in early, but it's creating that interest and making it innocent and childlike. They're messing around. It was always in the background from the beginning of the book, and then things get sinister. Like, okay, so story problems aside, I was really trying to work out for a while why I couldn't stand the show, and I found it really hard to pin down, as I said. So firstly, as I said, it just doesn't feel right. The atmosphere is off. It does not feel like His Dark Materials. It feels like a totally different story, which might be okay if it was a totally different but also good story, but what they've replaced it with is also, just independently of the book, I don't think a very good TV show. And I was thinking about this because I was trying to be fair. I was like, okay, am I just, because I love the book so much, I'm like, is it just me? Because I do have a problem with adaptations. I'm like, is it me? Is it, and because this show's had a lot of good reviews, loads of people seem to love it. I was like, do I just have a problem when they change things from the book to a TV show? And just irrationally, even if it's a good change or a change that's fine, have I got a problem with it? And I thought about it and I was like, no, I don't actually. That's not the case. Because some of my favourite books have been adapted and changed completely in ways that I don't hate, in ways that I love. So an example of this is Stardust. I love Stardust. I love the book and I love the movie, probably just as much as I love the book in a different way. And the movie is so different to the book. Another example, Howl's Moving Castle. I adore that book. Howl's Moving Castle is a fantastic book. It's fabulous, it's amazing. I also love the movie. The movie is so different though to the book. They changed so much. Changed way more than they do in His Dark Materials, actually. And I still love that. A Christmas Carol, that's another one. I mean, I love the book, I have read the book, but mainly my reference for A Christmas Carol is like obviously older adaptations and everything. But what I really loved, and I love all that, I love the traditional telling of A Christmas Carol. But what I also really loved was last year, the 2019 BBC adaptation of A Christmas Carol, where they changed so much from the book, or as they said, they just dug deeper into the story. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved everything they changed. I thought it was fabulous and fantastic. So no, I was thinking about this and going, it's not just me. This show was just bad, I think. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about why, though the movie certainly has its flaws, and it does, I don't actually hate the movie like I do the TV show. I know a lot of people do. A lot of people really hate the movie The Golden Compass. And possibly I will give it that I did see the movie when I was really young, and there's a lot of nostalgia there for me. So yeah, to be fair, there's that. But that kind of aside, even rewatching it and everything, why don't I hate the movie like I hate the TV show? And I was thinking, why does the movie feel more like His Dark Materials somehow, even though that they dumbed down a lot of the story, which I know is one of the main criticisms. They did make it kind of quite childish and various other reasons. And this is the kind of thing where it's like, I guess, you know, a story is greater than the sum of its parts. And going back to what I said at the beginning about the individual criticisms I have for this TV show aren't enough on their own to make the show fail, and I don't know what it is. I don't really know why overall it was so bad, because I can point to a lot of things in the movie that I didn't like and that were flawed, but it still in some ways worked, and it's really hard. It's like more feeling with this. But I'm getting kind of close to the answer, I think, and I kind of honestly think the answer as to why the movie feels more like His Dark Materials, feels more like the books, feels the atmosphere is there. Why that's the case more than the TV show, I think honestly the answer is that the movie dealt with character better in almost every single way. There are a lot of problems with the movie, but the one thing I fully believe that it has completely over the TV show, at least from what I saw. I only saw the first few episodes, but again, it was enough. I don't care if it gets better, frankly. I'll explain what pissed me off in episode 2. But the movie dealt with character better in almost every way, I think. Casting, dialogue, acting, their character relationships, all of those 4 things were dealt with so much better in the movie than the TV show, I thought. Characters, and this is the thing, characters are the key to every story. They're why we fall in love with stories, because we love the characters or because we find them interesting and we desperately want to know what happens to them. Okay, first off, I think the TV show was horribly cast. I think it was terribly cast. There are some fantastic actors in the TV show, but they were just so, I thought, so badly cast. The first moment that I was like, oh no, this isn't going to be what I hoped for, was when I saw the trailer before the first series even came out. What really actually annoyed me was the casting for Lee Scorsby. Now, I've got nothing against the actor who plays him. He's probably a fairly decent actor, I don't know, but I just think he's so wrong as Lee Scorsby. When I saw the trailer, I was like, please tell me that is not who they've cast as Lee Scorsby. Not only is Lee Scorsby one of my favourite characters in His Dark Materials, He is also one of my favourite literary characters of all time. I love him. He's fabulous. He's fantastic. He's like this old, he's, again, I thought the guy they cast for Lee Scoresby, he's too young, first of all. He's a Broadway guy, right? Am I correct in thinking he's a Broadway guy? He's not like grizzled enough. Lee Scoresby is quite rugged and like diamond in the rough, properly. First of all, Sam Elliott, I'm pretty sure that was who played him in the movie, was perfect casting, I think. And I don't think anyone could have topped that. Like, he's like an old cowboy basically, as Lee Scoresby. And Broadway, the sense I got from a few scenes of his that I watched, I didn't even get to the point where Lee Scoresby entered the TV show, but for his research for this video, I did watch some scenes that he was in on YouTube, and my initial fears were confirmed. I don't know, maybe he gets better, maybe you have to watch more of it and a lot of it, and he's fabulous as Lee Scoresby. Maybe I'm just upset because it's one of my favourite characters that was really, really changed, but I didn't like it. I thought it was too cheesy, just too Broadway, Lee Scoresby is like as opposite to Broadway as you can get. So I'm gonna talk about the movie now, and I know this isn't a review of the movie, but it's important, I think, because the movie cast, it was like the characters had just walked off the page. I thought anyway. I thought Daniel Craig was fantastic as Lord Asriel. I really thought he was great. He seemed powerful, confident, self-assured. Asriel, and I love this character, I loved him from the books. He's one of the best and most complicated villains of all time, because he's also sort of a hero. Nicole Kidman, I thought she was captivating as Mrs. Coulter, just the right levels of charming and cold. And I'm actually normally quite critical of Nicole Kidman in a lot of things, but I thought she did actually make a very good Mrs. Coulter. Lord Farr, I thought he was brilliant. He was imposing, really charismatic, imposing figure, sort of jolly, almost a bit like Father Christmas he reminded me a little bit of, but more badass. And we had Father Coram, who, again, I thought he was just brilliant. Lee Scoresby, Sam Elliott, there's never been someone born to play a character more than that man was born to play Lee Scoresby. And to be fair, the show could never have outdone the casting in Lee Scoresby, I don't think. And okay, I think probably a lot of the problems with the TV show, actually, now thinking about it, are possibly because they wanted to be as different as possible from the movie. Probably do a new, fresh take on it. I just wish they'd done it well. The casting for Lee Scoresby was so good. He was brilliant as Lee Scoresby. He was warm, he was, like I said, a little bit like rugged, a badass, really hardcore, but also really, his relationship with Lyra was so sweet. He was really just like gentlemanly, but also, yeah, like a diamond in the rough. That's the best way I can think of to describe Lee Scoresby. He's just a diamond in the rough. He's an absolute gem, but there's nothing polished about him. There's nothing, I never got that anyway. And I just think the Lee Scoresby that's in the show is that too. From what I saw of it, and again, to be fair, I haven't properly seen all his scenes, but he just wasn't, the cowboy Lee Scoresby that was... And I know, again, I say a lot of this is my personal opinions or my nostalgia and how I feel the characters are, but I just don't think who they replaced the characters with was any good, really. Like I said, Daniel Craig was fantastic as Lord Asriel. I like James McAvoy as an actor. I really like James McAvoy. I think he's such a talented actor. I hated him in this. And to be fair, I don't think it was so much the actor's performance. I thought the acting was really, really bad, but to be fair, because there were so many good actors in it, I think a lot of it is probably down to the writing and the direction, and I don't know what was going on with that. James McAvoy was just not Lord Asriel. He was not powerful enough. Like, he's the kind of person, he walks into a room and you go, you know what I mean? I thought Daniel Craig really, really got that. Probably because he plays Bond. I feel like Lord Asriel is a bit of James Bond to him, slightly. Or at least in the way that Daniel Craig played him. I did think he was perfect for the role. He's powerful. He knows that people listen to him. He knows he can just go in and take absolutely no shit from anyone. And James McAvoy just was lackluster. Lackluster, I thought, as Lord Asriel. Dialogue. Here's my problems with the dialogue. I thought the writing was so bad. I really did. So you know how good dialogue is so natural that you're totally immersed in the story and it seems like it's actually happening? Yeah, well, imagine the opposite of that. So when dialogue takes you out of the story because it feels fake and it feels like it's there for the benefit of the audience, and suddenly you become aware that there is an audience and you become excruciatingly aware suddenly that none of this is real and that you're watching actors saying lines. Yeah, it was exactly like that. The dialogue was stilted and awkward and unnatural. Natural performances actually stood out. Everyone was so weird. Like Charles, the librarian, I thought one of the only natural performances, I thought. They've got some good actors in the show, like I said, don't get me wrong, but I don't know what was going on here. Again, maybe it got better in later episodes. I don't know, I don't care, whatever. There's one scene where Lyra says something and the librarian says to her, goes, oh, the magisterium wouldn't approve of blasphemy. And she responds, "I thought we were protected by scholastic sanctuary." It's just the way they say it. It just feels like they just tell us information in dialogue in such a clunky and awkward way. "The magisterium wouldn't approve of blasphemy. If you live in a world that's ruled by, you know, religious zealots, basically, and blasphemy is completely illegal, I don't think you need to sort of wag your finger and be like, oh, the magisterium wouldn't approve of blasphemy." Yeah, we know, obviously. Like, just things like that all the time, and just the way it was said, and her going, "Oh, scholastic sanctuary," it just felt really like wink wink, nod nod to the audience, like, this is for your benefit, guys, you know what I mean, rather than a natural conversation between two people who know what's going on in the world. Another example of this is when Lord Asriel is leaving in the airship and Lyra's like waving him off, and just like out of nowhere she just goes to him, "Did it look like this? The airship my parents died in." Sorry? Like, that was just so fucking random and completely out of left field. It just felt so weird. It was the worst way, I thought, to tell us that her parents died. I get what they were trying to do, and I appreciate what they were trying to do. They failed massively, but I get that they were trying to establish that she was scared for him, that she cared about him, and that she was scared Asriel would abandon her like she believed her parents did. But Jesus Christ, was it done so ham-fistedly, it's probably not a word, but in such a ham-fisted way, that I immediately was like, oh, I see what they're trying to do here, and it's awkward. And it took me out of the story, and it put me into like analysis mode of, rather than feeling like I was watching a genuine character moment, I was like, oh, they've really clunkily tried to tell all this in this moment and tried to be clever with it, and no. So I think this is my main problem, or one of my main problems with this TV show. Lyra sucked. I'm sorry. Lyra is the best thing about the books, and they got her so wrong with the show. Firstly, I just want to probably point out, no shade to the actress. You know, there's always, first of all, there's always a thing with child actors. Child actors is difficult to get right, and I don't think it was so much her performance. Literally, like, no hate to her, you know, she's a kid, child actor, whatever. I don't think it was so much her performance, but how she was written and directed that really let this down. Like her and like a lot of the other actors, like I said, James McAvoy, who I think is a fantastic actor, I just didn't like him in this. Also, and this is a really important thing, I think they cast someone just way too old. I was watching this going, what is it about, why is Lyra feeling weird? And there are a few reasons, but I was watching this going, what is it about her? And I'm going, oh my god, Lyra becomes odd by looking older. She's just not convincing as a misbehaving little girl who can't sit still. She just comes off as like a really strange child. Like she came off to me as immature and lacking a bit in social skills rather than charismatic. Because Lyra's supposed to be 12. She's 12, I mean, I don't know how much her age varies during the series, but the one age I remember very clearly is that 12. She's definitely 12 for most of it, or some of it, whatever. The actress didn't seem 12 to me. I looked up how old she was. At the moment now, she's 15. She's currently 15. I don't know how old she was when they filmed season 1. Probably a lot younger, whatever. But she still looks really old in season 1. They should have cast someone who looked 12 or 11. Because I just don't think, she just seems old and looks old. I don't know, she just doesn't feel right. Lyra doesn't feel right. She feels how she was as a person. Her personality felt way too optimistic, and I don't know, a bit like a know-it-all, frankly, which isn't necessarily, okay, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, that's a bad character. It just doesn't make sense for her character. She felt a bit Hermione Granger. I was trying to think about Lyra felt a bit Hermione Granger in this. I think that's what I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love Hermione Granger as a character. She's a fantastic character. But it just makes Lyra seem strange. So I'm gonna read, and I have to do it from my phone, because as I said, my little sister has my book, and she sent me photos of pages I wanted. So I'm just gonna read this description of Lyra. This just sums her up very well and her behaviour. It's just half a page from the book. It's not just telling us though, it has shown us. We've seen her already interact with people. We know what she's like. This just perfectly goes on to sum it up. It talks about how she raided an Egyptian boat, and tried to sink it, basically. How she's like insane and has fights with everyone and everything. And then it goes on to say, she was a coarse and greedy little savage for the most part, but she always had a dim sense that it wasn't her whole world, that part of her also belonged in the grandeur and ritual of Jordan College, and that somewhere in her life there was a connection with the high world of politics represented by Lord Asriel. All she did with that knowledge was to give herself airs and lord it over the other urchins. It had never occurred to her to find out more. So she had passed her childhood, like a half-wild cat. The only variation in her days came on those irregular occasions when Lord Asriel visited the college. A rich and powerful uncle was all very well to boast about, but the price of boasting was having to be caught by the most agile scholar and brought to the housekeeper to be washed and dressed in a clean frock, following which she was escorted, with many threats, to the senior common room to have tea with Lord Asriel. A group of senior scholars would be invited as well. Lyra would slump mutinously in an armchair until the master told her sharply to sit up, and then she'd glower at them all until even the chaplain had to laugh. So the reason I've read that particular passage is because I think it's a really good condensed character description of Lyra, of who she is, what she's motivated by. And then maybe you'll understand a bit more why I didn't like her in the show and it didn't make sense for her and her motivations. So, like I said, she feels a bit of a know-it-all and a bit like Hermione Granger, which, as from that description, that's not Lyra, not at all. Lyra is stubborn, sulky, angry, and she lies without necessarily meaning to. And she can't sit still. She makes things up constantly. She gets into trouble. She literally just seems incapable of behaving. She just can't behave. Sulky, passionate, angry, and disobedient. And that's all, like, I love that about Lyra, and it makes her such an interesting child and really realistic. Those character elements to her, it's not just me getting annoyed that they changed it. Those things are kind of essential to her in the story and how she acts and pushes everything forward, those traits. In the show, she just seems very much like a precocious child, particularly in her relationship with Lord Asriel, which is just all wrong. Lyra is not a precocious know-it-all. That's fine if characters are. Hermione Granger was that, and she was a fantastic character. She was a precocious know-it-all. Lyra is not that in any way. I love that about Lyra, that she just couldn't seem to behave herself. And I'm going to go back to the movie of how Lyra was portrayed in the movie, particularly the beginning of the movie. Right from the beginning, because as I said, maybe Lyra gets better in the later seasons of the show, episodes of the show, probably not, but in the movie, and this is why I think they did the characters so superior to the show, so they got a lot of this right. They dealt with Lyra's character so much better. In the first scene of the movie is Lyra right in the action. We see she's wild, and she's playing with all the Egyptian and college kids, like she does in the book. You get to see her in her element as a natural leader. This is so important, I think, to see her at the beginning, already kind of who she is, as sort of leading these kids, fighting, scrapping. She's scrappy. We didn't get scrappy Lyra, I don't think, in the show. She's a natural leader, but she's also an innocent. She's a child, and we really see that innocence to her, while also seeing the scrap, the grit. You know, and again, the movie opens, we're given a little bit of a prologue about the world in the movie, again, but not really about Lyra. You're wondering who she is and how she got there, because we don't know. 3 minutes into the movie, we get our first gobbler reference, which I said I really liked, that they're playing gobblers. We get that before anyone goes missing. She says, "Hurry up, Roger, or they'll gobble you." So, casual conversation between kids. I thought, good way to convey information and build the world up. And I love this scene. So again, we have the kids fighting, they're throwing mud at each other. We see, right from the beginning, in the movie, Lyra's character, and I thought she seemed so similar to how she was in the book. We see that she's a liar. It's established immediately. They did not establish this in the TV show, but in the movie they established this almost immediately, that she's a liar, and we see her and Billy Costa building a rapport. To be fair, in the book, her and Billy Costa, while they know each other, and we know that they know each other in the book, there's not really a scene of them playing before he's taken. But another example of why I don't actually have a problem if they change things from the book to the movie, if it's a good choice. And I actually, in the movie, thought that was a good decision, making her and Billy Costa have a scene together before he was taken, to build up the rapport they had and really show that. I thought that was a good choice, and I'm going to talk about it because that was a really good scene. So she lies, and we see her and Billy Costa, their relationships. They're facing off, they have a fight. So we see her and Roger have been fighting the Egyptian kids. And she's lying, she's telling lies about the gate because they're losing the fight, and you see how she's really inventive, and she's saying, there's a curse on this gate. If you don't belong to the college, and if you pass this gate, Billy Costa, there'll be a curse on you. And it's just a very cute scene. And she said her own mother put a curse on the gate. And Billy says to her, "What mother? I thought you was an orphan," or whatever it is. And it just feels like more natural dialogue. Obviously she's a kid, and her acting still isn't fabulous. The child actor that plays, is a kid, it's fine, But she still feels more like Lyra. I thought the writing was better. And you learn so much about her from this. She's a liar, and she's feisty, and she doesn't have parents, rather than the weird scene in the show where it's like, did my parents die like this? There's so much revealed about her character and her background in just that scene with her and Billy. And I just want to talk about it as well, as kind of irrelevant, but I just thought it was a really sweet scene where at the end, after she said, meet me at midnight, I'll bring this cursed robe that you'll have to wear. I'll prove it to you that it's cursed, and they agree to continue their fight, and they'll meet at midnight or whatever it is. I don't know when. And then it's just very sweet, because then they sort of shake hands and grin at each other, and she goes,
"See you later then."
Okay.
You can tell they're just sort of friends, they kind of go their separate ways. And it just really brings home to you that they're just kids playing. And I think you really need that innocence. But not just innocence, it's like a wild innocence before the darkness comes, because it means more then when that innocence is lost. I just really loved that scene from the movie. I just thought it was really good, and just got across so much with in a natural way that the TV show didn't manage to. So again, the show doesn't really have her running on rooftops. Like, there's a bit of it, like, yeah, her and Roger, they run past the scholars and they're told to walk, not to run, but her like cheerful response, you know, just like whatever, she shouts back some quip to him, and the fact it's just the two of them, her and Roger, makes it feel again like she's just been a bit cheeky. Like, I want to see the wild and vicious liar that he talked about, you know, the greedy little savage that Philip Pullman wrote about. I love that description of her. Like, I read that she's a half wild cat, you know, she's I just love that description, a greedy little savage. And that just sums her up perfectly. Rather than just a little bit cheeky and she's been a bit naughty, she's running in the corridors. No, she's like a greedy little savage. I want to see that. I want to see the wildness there. You know, the child that's already a leader of people in the book, in the movie. She's followed around by a gang of urchins and she's getting into fights. She's stealing cigarettes and she's spending all her time on the rooftops. She's not just being a little bit naughty by running in the corridors. Lyra's got grit, and I didn't get that from the show. She felt book smart somehow. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's not, like, she didn't have the street smart that Lyra had. And in the show as well, and this does annoy me because I think it's so important, they also didn't establish Lyra as a liar until the second episode. At least not that I noticed, and I watched it and I was looking out for this. I don't know, maybe I missed something, but at least it wasn't obvious at all. They didn't establish her as a liar until the second episode, and they did it really badly. So she starts lying in episode 2, but it seems odd because we don't see her doing it like in the movie or the books, lying to scare or wind up the other children, which is how she uses lying to get people to listen to her. We don't see her as a leader in her element, you know. She just lies in the show to an adult, to Mrs. Coulter, about, like, in a really childish way. It just feels really strange and like she's lacking in social skills, which is fine if that's your character, but Lyra is not that. You know, she's supposed to be this natural leader who sort of, and also Lyra in the movie feels a lot younger than show Lyra, so it kind of feels more normal and natural rather than just strange. But her childish flaw of telling tall tales comes in handy as well. It's a massive, I know it seems like a big thing that I'm going off on, her lying, but it's a huge part of her character arc and part of the plot. Her being able to lie so well is what comes in handy when she uses it later in the story to trick the Bear King. And that's why Ulrich Bernison calls her, he names her Lyra Silvertongue. That's what he renames her as, because of her lying and tricking. She uses it. It's a massive part of her character, and I don't know how it's been paid off in the show, but probably not well, because they didn't really characterise her with it properly in the same way initially. It's just, you know? And also I love it, like the movie, the dynamic. We see her being brave and reckless. I'd say that describes, she's brave. She's sulky, angry, brave and reckless. And the dynamic between Lyra and Lord Asriel is done very well in the book. Their dynamic is one of the most interesting and one of my favourite character relationships ever. Asriel he's sort of the only person that she'll obey when she won't really obey the tutors. She massively respects him, and she's also a little scared of him. But in the show, she just seemed to be like, the first scene with him, she just seemed to be a sensible voice of reason with him. She's sort of like, Uncle, you shouldn't do that. Which just isn't Lyra at all. Don't get me wrong, in the book, she still tests his authority. She still argues with him, but in a sulky way, like a childish, passionate way, rather than seemingly sensible and honestly kind of a little bit condescending, like taking a slightly condescending tone with him, which I was like, no, that's my favourite dynamic, and that's just not at all how she would never condescend to Lord Asriel. You know, she'd be rude to him, she'd shout at him, she'd probably bite him, but condescend to him? No, she'd sulk at him. It's like she respects him too much to do that, and she herself is not precocious enough to do that. She herself is too passionate and angry to ever be condescending with him. So now, finally, here's the part that really made me give up on this series. Big spoiler, obviously, for season 1 or whatever. In the book, the whole way through, it's hinted, we don't quite, like I said, the whole mystery is what are they doing with the children? What the hell are they doing with the children? We don't know what they're doing with the children. So I just want to, in episode 2, they have a moment where Lyra finds out that Mrs. Coulter is one of the bad guys. And this happens in the book as well, where she basically finds out that Mrs. Coulter, that she's in charge of the gobblers, and she has something to do with the missing children and has been taking the children. Lyra finds out, again, fairly early on in the book, one of the things that prompts her to go off on her adventure. Okay, but we still have no idea what they're doing with the children. We have no idea at this point. We just know Mrs. Coulter is in on it and they're taking the children. What are they doing with them? We don't know. Did the show decide to do this and then gradually build the tension throughout the series and then it's revealed what they're actually doing to the children? No, they didn't, because why not make another terrible decision to go on top of all the other terrible decisions they made? In the show, she comes across the papers and she finds out that Mrs. Coulter is part of the Gobblers, the General Oblation Board. But not only that, this is when I gave up on the show. I was like, I've had enough. This made me so angry. She finds all the papers of Bolvanger and the machine, if you know what I'm talking about, of the machine, and a literal image of the cutting machine. She finds a piece of paper where it shows the diagram on the paper of the machine that cuts children apart from their demons. And then she says in the next scene to Pan, she says to, I'm quoting, did you see the equipment and blade to cut what? Oh, I wonder, why don't you just spell it out for us then? Because you've shown us the picture of it, that in a machine, there's a person and their demon, and there's a blade. Oh, I wonder what it could be cutting. Again, in the book, this is not revealed at this point. Can I compare this with the book of how it's revealed that children and their demons are being cut apart from each other? It happens about 3/4 of the way through the book. So towards the end of the book, again, because why would you reveal one of your biggest things early on in the show? Why would you do that? What is the purpose of that? Why would you even talk about the machine? It ruins so much of it. So firstly, as well, as I said, in the show, in episode 2, I don't think it's been established to us just how sacred and important demons are in this world. They've said at the beginning, and that's what I hate as well. Like I said, at the beginning of the episode, they had on the screen appearing, the relationship between human and demon is sacred. That doesn't mean anything to me. That doesn't mean anything to me because I haven't seen any of the show. I don't know what a demon is. I don't know any of this. You need to show me. I need to watch the show and understand and see that the relationship between human and demon is sacred. And then when we finally, later down the line, when it's been built up enough and we understand enough about the world to understand how essential that relationship is, then to find out what they're doing to the children, that's when it gut punches you. That is when it means something. Because if you just tell me at the beginning of episode 1, the relationship between human and demon is sacred, and then tell me in episode 2, oh, they're cutting people away from their demons, all the tension's gone from everything. It doesn't mean anything at this point. It's just ruined. So I'm going to read the scene to you again. It's a photo that my sister sent me from the book. I'm going to read you the scene of how you find out in the book that children and their demons are being cut away from each other. Bearing in mind this happens 3/4 of the way through the book. Towards the end of the book, this is when we find out. In the show, they did it in episode 2, right near the beginning. And this is how they do it, as opposed to Lyra finding a piece of paper. I'm just going to read you it. I'm probably going to cut some bits out as I read this, by the way. She finds out through the lithiometer that there's something haunting a village. In a shed in this village in the far north, in the snow, there's some sort of child or ghost that's haunting the villagers. Like, it's not a human, it's not a person. So they go, her and Ulrich Bernison, the bear, go into this village where, they meet the village man, and he says, Ulrich Bernison's translating, and he says to Lyra, he asks if we have come to take the child away. They are afraid of it. They have tried to drive it away, but it keeps coming back. So they're afraid of whatever this thing is, a child or a ghost that's on the edge of the village. This scene is building the tension so well. I just want to just to show you how this scene builds the tension as opposed to how the show didn't build the tension and showed us a piece of paper. So it's got Pan, her demon, he's freaking out. She's never seen him so frightened. She's described him as, he's not listening, they're going into this little shed that is dark at night. They're going into this shed, they know there's some sort of child or ghost in there. And her demon, she's never seen him so scared. And then she goes into the shed, the shack or the shed, the little house. Come out, Lyra said as loud as she dared. Come out. Not a sound came in answer. She pulled the door a little wider, and Pantalaimon leapt up into her arms, pushing and pushing at her in his cat form, and said, Go away, don't stay here. Oh, Lyra, go now, turn back. Trying to hold him still, she was aware of Ulrich Bernison getting to his feet, and turned to see a figure hastening down the track from the village, carrying a lantern. He spoke, and Ulrich Bernison said, He says that it's not the only child of that kind. He's seen others in the forest. Sometimes they die quickly, sometimes they don't die. This one is tough, he thinks, but it would be better for him if he died. So then, borrows the lantern, blah blah, he goes away from the hut and the bear. She lifted the lantern high and took a step into the shed, and then she saw what it was that the oblation board was doing, and what was the nature of the sacrifice the children were having to make. The little boy was huddled against the wood-drying rack, where hung row upon row of gutted fish, all as stiff as boards. He was clutching a piece of fish to him as Lyra was clutching Pantalaimon, with both hands, hard against her heart, But that was all he had, a piece of dried fish, because he had no demon at all. The gobblers had cut it away. That was intercision, and this was a severed child. I'm also going to read the beginning of the next chapter. It continues. Her first impulse was to turn and run, or to be sick. A human being with no demon was like someone without a face, or with their ribs laid open and their heart torn out, something unnatural and uncanny that belonged to the world of night ghasts, not the waking world of sense. So Lyra clung to Pantalaimon, and her head swam and her gorge rose, and cold as the night was, a sickly sweat moistened her flesh with something colder still. "Rata," said the boy. "You got my Rata?" Lyra was in no doubt what he meant. "No," she said, in a voice as frail and frightened as she felt. Then, "What's your name?" "Tony Makairos," he said. "Where's Rata?" "I don't know," she began, and swallowed hard to govern her nausea. "The gobblers..." But she couldn't finish. She had to go out of the shed and sit down by herself in the snow, except that of course she wasn't by herself. She was never by herself, because Pantalaimon was always there. Oh, to be cut from him as this little boy had been parted from his Rata. The worst thing in the world. She found herself sobbing, and Pantalaimon was whimpering too, and in both of them there was a passionate pity and sorrow for the half-boy. I'm going to stop there, but... Okay, and I read that whole scene because it's so fantastic, and that's the moment where you find out what they're doing. Where you finally find out 3/4 of the way through the book, the horror of what they're doing. By that point, we've spent long enough in this world, we spent long enough with Lyra to know how essential to a human being a demon is. And like it says in that scene, it describes the child as a half-boy. He's not really properly a person anymore because what makes him human has sort of been taken away. He's, you know, they just die. These children die without their demons, but he's so alone. He's like, literally part of his soul has been taken from him. The horror of that, the horror of discovering what they're doing, what the gobblers are doing, by finding poor, mutilated Tony, this poor, severed boy dying without his demon. You know, the punch of that, as opposed to just finding a document in the second episode with a full-on image of the machine and like a diagram of them, like what they're doing to children. It really explains all that's wrong with the show. And I've had enough. That's classic telling us what happens and the evil plan of the gobblers, and it just doesn't carry the emotional weight of the book. Where when we find out what they're doing to children, in the book, how we find out what they're doing to children is by seeing a child after what's been done to him, is by seeing the evidence. Seeing a child right in front of us after he's had his demon, more part of him, his demon that's more a part of him than any of his limbs, any part of his body, his demon belongs more to him than that. Seeing that cut from him forever, gone, lost, forever, how can you, forever not him, like, never go back. By this point in the story, we understand the true depth of the sacred connection and understand that it is sacred between human and demon, rather than the TV show just literally telling us with words on the screen at the beginning of the episode, the relationship between human and demon is sacred. Doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not invested in the world yet. I'm not invested in the characters. You need to show me you need to show me that it's sacred. Don't tell me it's sacred. And that difference between seeing the document on the table that Lyra has, you know, and the difference between that and finding out what happened so much later on in the series, so much later on, so the tension's built up. It reminds me of that quote, you know, the quote, "You don't write about the horrors of war. You write about a kid's burnt socks lying in the road." The point of that meaning that suffering and atrocities, they mean nothing to us in the abstract. Something about the human mind, they just don't. In an abstract sense, the human mind it doesn't affect us really in the same way when we hear this many people are suffering or this many people died, millions of people are suffering, millions of people die. Obviously it affects us and it goes in, but not in the same way as actually seeing what that is, because we can't comprehend it really, we can't understand it. It's about narrowing in on an actual example of it, on like the child's socks in the road. That's when you understand it. Finding Tony mutilated, a half-boy, as they describe him, cast out and alone and suffering and so wrong in their world that everyone around him, they can't even though he's a child, they can't even bear to have him around because he's like become an abomination almost, what they've done to him. That takes it out of the abstract and makes it personal. Seeing a mutilated child. I know he's not physically mutilated, but because we've understand this story well enough, by that point we understand just how big the mutilation is. So yeah, basically you found a mutilated child and it makes it personal. Lyra seeing a drawing of the machine and what it does is abstract. And I don't care about it because it's not personal. I haven't seen evidence of it. And maybe the scene that I just described of finding Tony in the snow is paid off well in the TV show. Maybe it is, but I don't know because I didn't get there, because I don't care anymore, because it annoyed me too much, because they showed the machine and revealed the machine way too soon. It lessens the tension and the horror. The build up to the machine that cuts the kids apart, and the build up to the procedure, and the build up to finding out what happens, it just ruined it. Just ruined it. And that's all I have to say on that. And as I don't know how long I've been talking for so long, and I hope that explains it. You guys wanted to know why I really couldn't stand the TV show of His Dark Materials, and I hope I did an okay job of sort of explaining what exactly it is and why. I hated it. It annoyed me. Watching bad TV shows, I don't know why, it actually makes me angry. Like it really does, especially when it's from source material that I love, or when it's got so much potential and they've just done it so wrong. It makes me angry. And it was like desecration almost. It's like, yeah, you took something so wonderful, so divine, and you fucked it. It's like, I don't know, drawing graffiti on a church or something, I guess. I'm just saying it just makes me angry in kind of a similar way. It feels like vandalism. It makes me mad. It makes me mad. Maybe it shouldn't, but it just does. That's why I really don't like His Dark Materials television show. Well done, BBC. That's all I have to say. Also, screw you for removing my videos for fair use, so I probably won't be using any footage. This was such a disappointment after, you know, the movie not been that great and them not making, obviously, any follow-up to the movies. This is what, like, the top of my list of books that I wanted to see adaptations of. Probably the books that I most want to see an adaptation of. And it's so bad and so disappointing that I stopped after episode 2 and I just refused to watch any more. I don't want to watch anymore. I have no desire to, because I found it so boring and so just not His Dark Materials, but it's not even a good show in its own right. And it's such a disappointment. That's all I have to say. His Dark Materials, massive disappointment. Massive. Huge. Which is a shame, because it's a fabulous story, and I advise everyone, if you've just seen the show or just seen the movie, read the book. Like, if you're into reading. And I know that's a classic thing, saying the book was better. The book, in this case, really was better. It is better. It's just better. Read the books. I'd even say watch the movie before you watch the TV show, because I think that managed to capture the atmosphere and the feeling of it more than anything. This show just did not feel magical. I don't have anything else to say. That's it. I have some ideas for what I'm going to talk about next week, but if you'd like to, I know I've got your whole list of suggestions, but if you've got any more suggestions, feel free to comment them down below. If you want, I'm probably going to balance out, do a short, easy one next week. So I don't know, if any of you got like any frivolous, easy ideas that I can talk about, that I don't have to write thousands of words on, let me know, and I will do that. I just wanted something that I can just sit down and talk for next week after this, and it will be a short one, hopefully. Anyway guys, yeah, that's everything. Well, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.